Good morning, everyone. Uh, First, thank you, Luis, for your warm words. Please send our warm thanks to the rector of the ALCALÁ and the members of the rectorate, also to the members of the organizing committee and scientific committee, and the honor is ours for having the opportunity to celebrate to hold this conference in such a privileged site. Okay, this morning is a special morning for the members and supporters of ACEPELT. Opportunities to learn from a Nobel laureate are rare and precious, but today we have the opportunity to learn from Sir Richard Roberts, Nobel laureate in physiology or medicine, 1993. Therefore, we can consider ourselves truly fortunate. When we decided that this year conference would focus on the multifaceted issue of hunger and how to address the zero hunger challenge from several different perspectives, agricultural, economic production, sustainability, I immediately thought that the conference would lack meaning without Professor Roberts delivering the keynote lecture. And I decided that we would only hold the conference on this topic if Professor Roberts agreed to join us and deliver the keynote lecture. I have to tell you that the mission was quite easy and quite straightforward because, fortunately, Professor Roberts immediately accepted our invitation. Therefore, I would like to express him my heartfelt thanks publicly for his kindness, his generosity, and for graciously accepting our humble invitation. I sincerely hope that you are having a good time with us and that you take with you a fond memory of this group of admirers. I won't go over Professor Roberts' curriculum vitae. I asked him for some lines for a short bio, and those lines are in the program, and I invite all of you to read them for three reasons. Because Professor Roberts' biography is truly fascinating, because I believe we owe him a great deal, and because we as quantitative economists share something important with him, the use of extensive computer methods. However, those lines don't mention that Professor Roberts is a Nobel laureate, nor a Nobel laureate and awarded by his incredible discoveries on the structure of genes. Those lines only refer to his passion for science. And I would guess, his passion for science since he was a child and attended St. Stephen's School and the City Bath Boys School, of course, in the city of Bath. Nor they don't mention something that I find truly remarkable. Professor Robert leads a campaign in support of genetically modified organisms, joined by over 170. I think that the exact figure is 177. 150. The figure is increasing and increasing. 190 Nobel laureates who seek to raise awareness that genetically modified crops bring environmental and human benefits. Professor Robert says, as you said in Spanish, if you are hungry, food is your medicine. And he also has a message for anti-GMO groups. Listen to the scientists. Well, then, precisely this morning, Professor Roberts will be speaking us on fact and fiction about GMOs and the future of biotechnology. And we are truly eager to hear from this distinguished scientist. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming with a warm round of applause an exceptional scientific research, a great science communicator, a scientific activist, Nobel laureate in physiology or medicine, Sir Richard John Roberts.
So I'm going to talk to you today about GMOs. I'll tell you how I got involved. I don't work on these, so I'm going to tell you how I got involved, and also tell you about some of the facts and some of the fiction that is being promulgated by various people. One of the things that is absolutely clear at the moment is that climate change is causing unbelievable problems. Not only is it causing atmospheric problems and affecting the quality of life, it's very much affecting agriculture too. And it turns out that bioengineered crops can help to address this. It's possible to make plants, to engineer plants so that they will suck more CO2 out of the atmosphere than they do at the moment. But it requires these new techniques of biotechnology, which we call genetic engineering, in order to do so. If we can make crops that are GMOs, put in the genes that will help them to suck CO2 out of the atmosphere, could make a huge difference. Just imagine if every field that was growing plants, wheat, whatever, were all engineered to be sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere and make a huge difference. But that's not what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to talk to you about the way in which genetically modified plants can actually help feed people. You have to remember that most of the improvements in agriculture, in the plants that we grow, have taken place in the West. They've taken place in Europe, they've taken place in the US, and they're the results of a lot of traditional breeding over many hundreds of years. We've slowly made them better and better. The same has never been done for the plants that grow in the developing world that are different from us. You know, you don't eat a lot of cassava, and yet cassava is an incredibly important crop. And there are things that can be done to help the developing country to improve the quality of the crops that they grow so that they would match the quality that we have here in the West. You have to remember there are more than 800 million people. Can you imagine that? 800 million people go to bed hungry every night. They don't know where the next food is going to be coming from. And I find that appalling. And I think we should do something about it. And the sad thing is, we know we can do something about it. The term genetically modified organism is very misleading. I don't like it. I would much prefer to have another term. But on the other hand, everybody knows GMOs. This is the thing that's been advertised very widely, and you've been told how dangerous these things are. But every life form on this planet, including every one of you in this audience, has been genetically modified. When your parents conceived you, mother brought you into existence, you don't look like either of them. You look like a mix of them if you're lucky. Sometimes you look totally different, but you're genetically modified. Is that bad? No, of course it's not bad. It's natural evolution. And plant and animal breeding has been practiced for centuries, and it involves genetically modified organisms, genetic modification of the plants in order to make them grow better, taste better, grow taller, or whatever trait you're looking for. And unfortunately, within the anti-GMO movement, hypocrisy abounds. It's really hard for me to understand how they can say many of the things they say. So for instance, you know, if you're diabetic, you take insulin. Where do you think that comes from? Have you ever been to a clinic where they're collecting your insulin so they can give it to diabetics? No, of course not. we have a genetically modified organism that will make insulin. You take the gene for human insulin, grow it in a bacterium or in a yeast, and you can make human insulin, which you then give to diabetics. So since GMOs are so dangerous, why isn't that dangerous? Why are they protesting other stuff? Why did they accept vaccines for COVID so quickly? You know, the Europeans claim that, you've got to be very careful about any new innovations and so on. And yet, as soon as a pharmaceutical is involved, like insulin or like a COVID vaccine, it gets accepted very quickly. And why do they allow millions of tons of genetically modified seeds, soybeans and others to come in to feed the animals in Europe? And you then eat the animals. You get some meat on your table. The meat that came from the animal that the meat came from has been genetically modified because the animals eat genetically modified crops. But it doesn't affect the meat. Okay? But why is this okay? If it's so dangerous for humans, why is it okay for animals? Well, of course, the answer is that it's really not. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I got involved in this in the first place. One of the people who invented the genetic modification approach to improving crops was Mark van Montague. He's a very famous scientist in Belgium. And some 35 years ago, actually maybe more now, figured out how to transfer genes from one organism to another using a technique that was perfectly natural. There's a bacterium that grows on certain plants, and it's called agrobacterium. And when it grows, it transfers genes from itself into the organism that it's growing on, into the plant that it's growing on. And Mark discovered this. And he thought, well, if it can transform genes that it normally has in it, what if we put some different genes in? Could it transfer those? The answer was yes, it could. And so in this way, it was a way to introduce foreign genes into plants. He looked at this and he thought, well, this could be really good. If we can put in the correct genes, maybe we can improve plants in ways that have currently not been possible. I was invited to a celebration of a birthday of his, to a meeting in Ghent. And I sat all day listening to agricultural scientists, plant biotechnologists in Europe saying how difficult it was for them to work. The Greenpeace were busy trying to stop their grants, try to stop them talking about this stuff even. The meeting I went to, they were demonstrating outside the meeting, saying how dangerous all this stuff was. And yet, it's not. There's zero evidence that it's dangerous. In 35 years, there's not been one single example where it's been a problem. And after this meeting, I'd been invited to go and talk to the European Commission about the future of healthcare. Not that I know anything about that particularly, but, I could spout a lot of words about where biotechnology was taking us. And I decided I was going to change my talk. And I chose instead to talk about the fact that food is medicine. If you're hungry, you don't have enough food, then you also don't have all of the medicines that you typically get by eating a normal, healthy diet. And so I talked to the European Commission about this. And after my talk, an Italian senator came over to me and she said, I'd never heard this before. I had no idea what was going on. We've been hearing so much from Greenpeace and, they do ads, they do television show, all sorts of things. And she says, I've changed my mind. I was opposed to GMOs and now I'm totally for it. I'm hoping some of you will have this same experience today. And a number of staff members from some of the people who were in the European Commission came to me and said, well, we've never heard this because nobody talks about this in Europe anymore because Greenpeace had effectively shut them down. And so I thought when I got back that maybe I could help do something about this. And I talked to one or two of my Nobel laureates, my friends, and I said, why don't we organize a Nobel campaign about this? And before very long, I had about 100 Nobel laureates all signed on saying we'd be glad to support this. I ran a news conference down in Washington, and we made a big deal of laying it out. We sent this letter, shown on the left, to every member of the United Nations from every country in the United Nations. We sent it to the leaders of Greenpeace and said, it's time to stop. It's time to stop spreading false information about GMOs. I like the cartoon because I think it illustrates very well. This was done by an artist in Iowa who thinks of Greenpeace as this rather awful-looking person on the left, telling this little boy who's hungry, do you know what this stuff is going to do to you? And he says, yes, it will allow me to live. I can find something to eat. We have a website, it's shown at the bottom, supportprecisionagriculture.org. These slides that I use will be put up on that website after this talk is finished. There's a lot of information about GMOs there. There's also a list of the 180 Nobel laureates that we now have who've signed on to this campaign, and I'm sure we're going to get more. And you can sign on too if you want to join us. There's an opportunity on the website for you to join us. Now, food means agriculture. You know, unless you live in some small village in Africa where you're growing your own food, you go to the supermarket. You go off and buy as much food as you want. Where do you think this food comes from? Well, it's farmers. Farmers go out, they produce all the food. And for the last 10, 12,000 years, we've been using what I think of as rather crude genetics in order to improve these crops. We take two crops, one male, one female, cross them, and hope that we're going to improve one of them as a result of gene transfer. And this is, how we make humans. It's exactly the same way it goes on with plants. You find a plant that has a trait that you want and put it into the crop that you're currently growing in order to try to improve it. It's called traditional breeding. And for most of the last 10, 12,000 years, this is what we've been doing, traditional breeding. And when you cross two plants, just like when you cross two humans, 50% of the genes come from one parent, 50 from the other. And so you get a mix. And in this way, occasionally, you get something that's really good because you've transferred a gene from a plant that maybe doesn't grow so well into one that grows really well, and it makes it grow better or taller or give bigger grain or whatever. And that's been very successful, but it's slow. You don't know exactly what's happened. You've also transferred a lot of genes that you don't know what they are. You don't know which genes have gone in. Now, when Van Montagu and Jeff Shell came along and discovered a genetically modified plant, a way of doing it using agrobacterium, now what you can do is you can take one gene or two genes that you want to put into a new plant. Maybe you found a gene that will make the plant drought resistant. And if you're growing in hot climates, and our climate's getting increasingly hotter, drought resistance is a good thing. And so he found a way that you could take 1-2 genes from another plant, from some different source, put it into the plant, the crop that you're growing, and then you would get a plant that was improved. But the problem with that, I wouldn't say a problem, but the downside of that was you didn't know where that gene was going to go. You didn't know where in the genome it was going to get implanted. And so what happened, it would often go into a plant, but it didn't have any effect because it wasn't getting expressed or something else was going wrong or is in a bad space. And so you then had to look at all of the plants that had been crossed, find the one that had the gene in a place that was useful. But more recently, when CRISPR was discovered, as some of you probably heard last night, all of a sudden we found a way to be able to do this precisely. We could do it in a way that we'd never been able to do before. And if I want to put a gene into exactly one place, I know how to do it. And I can do it with the CRISPR method. We can't always know what is going to go on afterwards. We've got to make sure that it doesn't cause problems when we put it in. We want to put it in a place where it's not going to cause problems, but we can do it. And this has given us opportunities not just in agriculture, but also in human health too. There are many ways in which CRISPR can provide us with a precise way of making the changes that we want to make. And so in many ways, this is a great improvement over any sort of traditional breeding, where you mix genes, you get hundreds of genes, you don't know where they've gone or what they're doing. With CRISPR, you know which gene, you know exactly where it's gone, and then you can check that it's there and has worked out okay. So that's terrific. In case there's one or two of the audience who don't really know all the biology, I like to use this example of what happens. Let's say, instead of a gene, I want to take a GPS system from one car and move it into another one. Do I take the cars apart, mix everything together, and then select the version that has the GPS in it? Well, no, actually, we just unplug the GPS from one car and put it in the other. That is the CRISPR method of doing things. This is how CRISPR works. You take one gene, you put it where you want it to go, just as with you do it when you're transferring a GPS. Now, of course, Greenpeace would have you believe that this was a big problem. For instance, they would say, oh, if you take a gene from a fish, then the new plant is going to swim where you put it. Or if you take it from an aeroplane, now your car is going to fly. I'm sure all of you in this audience appreciate that this is nonsense. But this is what Greenpeace have been selling. They tell you if you take a gene from one organism, somehow you're going to take characteristics from that source other than just the gene. And it's wrong. It's disinformation. They know it's wrong. They know it's disinformation. But it's an easy way to get you scared. And this has been incredibly successful for them, as I'll show you in a moment. But the important thing is not so much where the gene came from as what is the product. What does it produce? The method by which you get it there doesn't matter. Just imagine a lady goes into a fashion store, sees a nice dress, and she says, well, am I going to look good in this dress? She doesn't say, where did this dress come from? Who made this dress? You take it, you buy it because it's good. The product is what's important. Now, you have to remember something, that plants have a bit of a problem. They can't run away from everything that wants to eat them, right? They see a cow coming along, wants to eat it. Can they run away? No, they can't. An insect comes along, wants to eat it. They can't run away. So what do? They produce pesticides. And there's quite an interesting little story connected with this. There are many, but this is the one I like to tell. If you think about celery, we all like celery. Celery is good. Celery actually has quite a lot of pesticides in it, many of which are carcinogens. They're listed down here on the left. And the thing about celery is that we eat it, the carcinogens get into our stomachs, and the bacteria take care of them. Then there's not enough for it to be a problem. However, ladies who used to be cutting up, and men too, who used to be cutting up celery in order to put it into packaging to sell in supermarkets, discovered they were having problems on their hands caused by these carcinogens, and in fact some of them ended up getting cancer as a result of this. And then scientists realized what the problem was, and so they started wearing gloves. Problems went away. And so in small doses, these things are fine. It's not a problem at all. But in high doses, which you get when you're constantly touching and cutting this, then it's a problem. And it's true for pretty much every plant that you know. They produce pesticides, things that are designed to kill the insects that would eat them. But, insects are small by comparison with us. Doesn't take much to kill an insect. Takes an awful lot to kill us. And so it's perfectly safe for us to eat them. Now, I want to talk about food in developing countries. In Africa, South America, Asia, many developing countries, they need better crops with higher yields. They need the products of the precision breeding that CRISPR techniques, GMO techniques can help. So why doesn't Europe promote this? Why doesn't Europe say, hey, this is a great way in which we can help the developing countries that we colonized centuries ago and destroyed for the most part? Here's a way to pay back. Here's a way to help them to feed themselves. So why doesn't Europe endorse this? Can you imagine why? Why would you not? If you were told, here is a way in which you can help someone in Africa to live when otherwise they couldn't live, wouldn't you want to do it? I think most civilized people say, yes, of course we want to do it. So, question is, why don't Europe get involved in this? And could it be politics or money or both? Well, of course, money is always a powerful incentive. I always say when you want to know why people do things, look for the money, and you will often discover this is why they're doing it. But politics and power can also be a powerful incentive for people to do things. And one of the things that happened was that Europeans were not happy to think that it was the USA that was controlling their food supply here. They were buying seeds, they were buying crop food from the USA, and they didn't like that. They thought they should be able to produce their own. So how you can prevent that? Well, at the time, Monsanto was one of the very big producers of crops and seeds that came into Europe. So why not just ban Monsanto and say, oh, we don't want the US to take over our food supply. We'll do it with Monsanto and ban them instead. But there's a slight problem. And the problem was that you couldn't ban Monsanto because then you wouldn't have the seeds you need to grow the crops that you're growing. And Monsanto made a huge mistake, unbelievably stupid thing to do. And in fact, I talked to the CEO of Monsanto after that decision was made. They discovered a way to improve the crops by inserting a herbicide-resistant gene into the crops, and then you could spray it. This was a great method. Every farmer loves this. The herbicide that you need to put down to protect your crop, stop weeds growing, is glyphosate. And if you don't have that, if the plant doesn't produce its own to make it resistant, then you have to put down a lot of herbicides in order to protect your plants and your crops against weeds. Every herbicide that we know is more dangerous than glyphosate. Glyphosate is the safest herbicide we know about. But that didn't worry anybody. The Green parties, and Greenpeace in particular, figured out that this was the way that they could attack Monsanto and attack the US agricultural industry. Why not just ban GMOs? That will stop Monsanto from sending these GMO-modified seeds into Europe, and at the same time has no economic consequence to Europe. Because you say, we'll ban GMOs, no one cares. Europe doesn't need GMOs. Nobody in the developed world need GMOs. It's just those in the developing world that do. And this turned out to be incredibly successful. They talked about the precautionary principle. They said, well, these GMOs are very new. Okay? We don't know if they're safe. We need to test, find out, are they safe? We need to do some science, some experiments, and so on. All of which was quite reasonable. I don't have any problems with that. That was okay. But how much science do you need to do? How much evidence do you need before you say these things are safe? We have 35 years now of evidence. Not one problem, not a single problem. People have been eating GMO foods for years. BT corn has been tremendously successful in the US. It's saved the corn crops. It's grown in South Africa. It's grown in many countries because it prevents insects from eating the corn when it carries this gene BT It's a toxin that comes from Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a bacterium. And this is, for instance, the way in which organic farmers protect their crops. They take Bacillus thuringiensis, this bacterium, and spray it all over their crops. Okay, it's a good reason why you should always wash your organic foods. Also turns out to be one of the reasons why, if you want to get a bacterial infection from food, eat organic. Organic is very good for that. So you have to be careful. Life is complicated. But the point is, Greenpeace seized on this, and what happened was that they get most of their funding from donors, and within a year of being anti-GMO, their income tripled. Just from donors. Everybody said, oh, this is great. Greenpeace said, oh, we're protecting you from all of this dangerous stuff that's going on. And they liked that. They thought this was pretty good. Tripled. $500 million a year that they get. Unbelievable. But then, as I mentioned before, insulin for diabetics, cheese also has modified organisms to make it, wine, bread. The vaccines for COVID came along very quickly. And, the Greenpeace like to talk about the precautionary principle. We've got to be very careful about this dangerous stuff that we're putting out there. Cell phones apparently don't apply. Cell phones are okay. You may realize that looking at a cell phone for too long without a screen will damage the macula in your eyes. And an awful lot of teenagers these days and young people in their 20s are discovering that they have very degenerated macula in their eyes that normally you wouldn't get until you were 60, 70, 80 years old, all because of a lot of time spent looking at cell phones. You can get filters, though, and there are also software solutions to help that, but this was only known more recently. So anyway, what I want to do, is to give you one example that was mentioned yesterday in the talk on CRISPR about golden rice. So golden rice is something that is really an unbelievable scientific achievement. If you go into the developing world and you look at the diet of most of the people there, they don't usually get a lot of beta-carotene, which is a precursor of vitamin A, that you need in order to make sure that you have good vision and that you don't have a lot of other problems. But rice, which is one of the staples that's eaten in many developing countries, while it has beta-carotene in the stem and in the leaves, that's not what you eat. You eat the grain. And Peter Jennings, back in 1984, had this idea. What if we could modify rice so that instead of just putting beta-carotene in the stems and so on, why don't we arrange for it to go into the rice grain itself? And there was a lot of work done to try to achieve this by traditional methods. Nothing worked. They couldn't do it. And then two scientists, Ingo Petrikis, Peter Bayer, found a way to do this. They discovered that if they could take genes from two different plants, put them into rice, now they could make something that they call golden rice, shown in the picture on the right-hand side, that's got this yellow color. And so, carrots have an orange color because of the beta-carotene that's there. And beta-carotene is the precursor of vitamin A. Sounded great. So it became a reality in 1999. So this was the first time when golden rice was being made in the lab. Now, typically what happens when you develop something in the lab, it's never good when it's first made. You need to make some modifications. And so usually within 2 to 5 years, you've made those modifications and now you're producing reasonable amounts of beta-carotene. But it's a GMO. And so what happened, Greenpeace almost immediately came out and told everybody how dangerous golden rice was going to be because it was a GMO. So what did they spend it on? Advertising, making films to scare you, to show how dangerous these things were. It's unbelievable. And the scientists tried to tell them, this isn't right. You can't do this. But, the governments don't give us money to advertise the science that we're doing. They don't give us huge amounts of money to make films showing how good this stuff is. And so when you're trying to compete with someone telling you one story with a lot of money, and you with the true story but no money, you can't win. You just cannot win. And as a result of this, they got everybody scared in Europe and elsewhere in the world about the dangers of GMOs. And this was the real problem. And they did everything they could to stop it. They came out with this golden illusion. This was a pamphlet that they produced, was mentioned yesterday. Unbelievable. They claim it's taken so long for golden rice to really get it at a point where it can be sold to everybody that it can't possibly work. What they failed to tell you, though, was that it was because of Greenpeace's actions that it took so long, right? They say, oh, it must be an illusion, can't possibly work, and yet they did everything they could to stop it. And why? Because golden rice is a pharmaceutical, and it's very hard to be against pharmaceuticals. As a result of all those actions, 205 million children have died or suffered because of vitamin A deficiency. Okay, what happens if young kids don't get enough vitamin A? They suffer blindness, and being blind in an African village is not a good thing. They develop other symptoms. There are immune system problems that they run into because they don't get enough vitamin A. Here was a solution. Here was a way that you could give it. And the nice thing about this was that the money that went into to pay for the development of golden rice was put up by a company, Syngenta. They have a patent on it, but they were prepared to give it away to all the poor farmers who needed it for nothing. They didn't want anything for it. They did this as a humanitarian gesture, and yet Greenpeace stopped it. I find this a crime against humanity as far as I'm concerned. This isn't right. We have to help these people. We don't want to condemn them to a future of hunger and not having access to the very best that biotech can offer. Now, there have been a few examples where individual countries, have actually chosen to adopt GM crops. BT cotton on the second row here is now available in many countries, but there are still some that object to it. BT brinjal, so aubergine, eggplant, this was one of the first genetically modified crops. It was approved in Bangladesh. The local Greenpeace people in Bangladesh did everything they could to stop it, but the Prime Minister stepped in, said, this is okay, you can grow it. And now in Bangladesh, they grow so much brinjal that they have to export it. They can't eat it all themselves. They have to export it. It's been incredibly successful. We're hoping that Muhammad Yunus, who is currently the temporary Prime Minister in Bangladesh, will also help to relax the regulations against GMOs. But you can see here, running down cotton, corn, and so on, papayas, many of these are approved. Papayas is an interesting story. There was a big epidemic of a virus in the papayas that grow in Hawaii, and local scientists there figured out how to stop this, genetically modified the papayas so that the virus was they effectively vaccinated the papayas against this virus, and so it didn't destroy the crop, it saved the crop. Took a long time to get that approved, but it eventually got approved, and now it's sold throughout the US. People eat it all the time. It's sold in many places. It's been available and eaten for years. Not a single problem, not one. Many of these other things too. GMO mustard was recently approved in India, and we're hopeful that perhaps Modi will change his mind. He'd been opposed to GMOs, not because he was opposed, but because his science advisor and his agricultural minister were opposed. I actually went to speak to him about this, and it was obvious he would have been in favor but the minister stopped him. They've adopted now a new agricultural minister who is very pro-GMO, and I'm hoping to talk to Modi again later this year in the hope that we can do something in India. India is a country now with the largest population, single population for a country in the world, and they have major problems with the food. They need better crops. They need to be able to do things in a better fashion. Golden rice, right at the bottom there, was approved in the Philippines 3 years ago. We thought, great, going to get it growing, people will see the advantages, and perhaps this can spread worldwide. But Greenpeace activists in Philippines decided this was something they were going to target. They filed a lawsuit. The court that heard this lawsuit didn't get any testimony from scientists who knew what was going on, and they banned it. They decided to ban it because they were subject to the same kind of publicity that Greenpeace put out here in Europe. The present administration in the Philippines, the government, are trying to reverse this decision, trying to get it reversed. Whether it will be or not, we don't know yet, but it should be. Because what happened was that the lawsuit not only stopped golden rice, it stopped every genetically modified crop that could be grown in the Philippines. Now, there are a number of crops that are under development that could make a huge difference. So I'll just talk about a couple of these. One of these is bananas and plantains. In Uganda, 1/3 of the calories that are consumed by the population come from plantains or bananas or relatives, and they suffer from a variety of diseases. Bananas are pretty susceptible to diseases, but there was a fungus that was really causing major problems there. Scientists in Kenya, the Agricultural Research Institute there, came up with a way of modifying these bananas so they were resistant to this wilt that was causing the fungus that was causing the problem. Looked really good. They did some field trials. They looked excellent. Showed them in Uganda that they could be done. The parliament looked at this and said, hey, yep, this is fine. We're all in favor of this. The prime minister, who I met at MIT some years ago, said fine. President said fine. And when he was asked to sign the bill, his wife and daughter got to him. And they'd been gotten to by Greenpeace activists. And they'd been told that this was really dangerous, they shouldn't do it. And they convinced the president that he shouldn't sign. And so he sent it back to Parliament to modify the bill. And it's still sitting there. It's still not been approved. These are crops that are being decimated by a fungus. The people need them. 30% of the calories that are eaten come from this crop. And yet they won't allow the genetic modification that makes them resistant to English. I find this just absolutely appalling. Okay, there are a number of other examples here, and I see I don't have too much more time, so I'll skip by the rest of them. But there are a lot of crops in development in labs that could make a huge difference in agriculture, in farmers' lives. Now, you have to remember that food choice, that is deciding what you want to eat when you go to a restaurant, is a luxury of the developed world. This is not something that is common in the developing world. You go into the local villages where most of the people live, they don't have a choice of food. But if you don't like GM crops, don't eat them. Don't order them. Okay? But please, please don't pretend they're dangerous. Don't say, I'm not going to eat it because it's dangerous. It isn't. There's just zero evidence for that. And if anything, they're probably safer than traditional foods. Remember how traditional foods were made? 2 plants, cross them, half the genes from this plant, half the genes from this plant, but there's just 1 or 2 in this plant that you were looking for in this new one. But when that comes along with maybe 50, 100, 200 other genes that got into this plant and you don't know what they are, that's traditional breeding. The precision breeding method that CRISPR allows is I can say, I just want these 2 genes. And so I pick them up, I put them just like a GPS system, into the new plant. Okay? That seems to me safer than traditional breeding. Now, for developed countries, food is not a problem. I want to know the last time you went into a restaurant and they said, well, we don't have a menu to offer you, but we have this today and you can eat this. That doesn't happen. It's not a problem. We have choice. You go to the supermarkets, you've got choice. Go to a restaurant, you've got choice. And we must not forget that when we start to make statements in developing countries claiming dangerous things or whatever, everybody's listening. Not just your political constituents, but everybody is listening. And the effects can have enormous consequences in developing countries. Really important to make sure that we don't send messages to the developing countries that are going to inhibit their growth. In a way, it's sort of a modern form of colonialism also. It's awful. We should not do it. We must think about what we say. We need a lot more science in politics. We need the politicians to listen to scientists. Of course, it would be nice if we had a little less politics and science too. Politicians should listen to the scientists that they fund. Why would you give money to scientists to do science, to do good science, if you're not going to listen to what they have to say at the end of it? Okay? If the scientists tell you that these things are safe, why would you not listen? I don't understand it. And civil society can play a role too. Major religious leaders should speak out. I spoke to the previous pope and tried to persuade him to make a statement about GMOs, something that would be very easy to say, that this was a way to help the poor people in the developing countries, and many of the Catholics live in developing countries. And he was unwilling to do so. And the reason was because an Argentinian economist had told him that all GMOs did was to allow big companies to take over the land of the smallholder farmers, which isn't true. There have been papers produced showing that that is not true. If anything, GMOs help the poor farmers more than they do the big companies. I tried to talk to this Argentinian economist. He refused to speak to me. So Greenpeace leaders too, they've refused to speak to me. They won't talk to me. I find that a little concerning. Groups like the Rotary clubs are actually in a very good position to help people. I go off and give talks to local Rotary clubs near Boston, and every time I go, I get a very receptive audience because they realize that GMOs can help their constituent farmers. You could do that around the world too. Influential celebrities, some at least, should speak out. You have to be careful. They don't all say the right things, but there are some that do. Very often there are a few soccer players, internationally known soccer players, film stars and so on. Some of these could speak out. But one of the things that concerns me more than anything else is the media. The media should be telling the factual stories about GMOs. And the problem with the media is they like bad stories. They don't like good news. They like bad news. And so whenever a good story like this comes along, they want to tell you, oh, it's a 50-50 thing. You know, we've got a few people here don't like GMOs, a few people who like them. Instead of telling you that 95% of all scientists say GMOs are great, and 5% that say they're not are either ignorant or they're deliberately being obfuscating. But the one thing that did come out of the Roman Catholic Church was this particular circular letter to the bishops about the bread and the wine that is used during Eucharist. And what it says, if the Eucharistic material comes from a GMO, it's perfectly safe. It still works. I thought that was at least something, you know. I think this new Pope, I'm hoping, will do a better job, and I'm going to try and talk to him and see if I can convince him to say something publicly, and mainly about the morality of this. Because I think what's happening is the European politicians, the people who are pushing this anti-GMO stuff, they're not on moral high ground. It's kind of disgusting, I think. And perhaps the Pope making a strong statement could change their minds about that. There are some positive signs in Europe. So Finland's Green Party now supports GMOs, and there are a few other examples down here where people are starting to be much more accepting. In Denmark, they're doing a much better job. There are a number of people who have been converted, people who were anti-GMO. The person on the top left, Patrick Moore, it was he who started this anti-GMO movement. And he's now come out and said he was wrong, just admitted it, he was wrong. The other two also, Mark Linus on the right, was so anti-GMO, he's an Englishman, he used to go around burning crops, burning fields that had GMOs in them. And he's actually written a book and said how wrong he was. He's apologized for this. And one person in Ghana, in Africa, he was head of the Peasants Association, was very anti-GMO, took some time off, read about GMOs, read about the science, and changed his mind completely. And so now he's totally in favor of GMOs. And that's important. This is the Peasants Association in Ghana. And I rather like this picture here. I call it Have a Heart. You look on the left and you see, what a typical meal in a restaurant looks like in the West. And on the right, you see children who do not have enough food to eat. And, they don't say, what will I eat today? They say, will I eat today? And we can make that possible. We really can make this possible. But we've got to make sure the politicians listen. We've got to make sure that Greenpeace backs off from what it's saying. They should tell the truth. Why do they need to tell lies all the time? Just for money, or they have a little bit of political power? But that's not a good reason, right? You've got to help these people. And I finish with this. Please join us. Support precisionagriculture.org. You can read about this. My slides will be available there if anybody wants to use them. We've recently started something, or I should say Vivian Namey has started something in Lebanon. I'd given a talk over there. She decided GMOs were something good, could be helpful in Lebanon. And so we're trying to get GMOs into Lebanon and show the farmers there that this can help. And the advantage is they don't have European regulators telling them what they can and can't do, and they can make decisions locally that hopefully will allow this kind of procedure to go on. So thank you all very much, and I'll be happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Sir Richard. We have time for a couple of questions, and then if someone would like to, Jim.
Thank you very much. You're at the very beginning of your speech, I think you named something that has really changed the global politics of these issues. It's COVID. Because once upon a time, most of the opposition to biotechnology of any sort could be seen as opposition to GMOs or transgenic technologies and to vaccines. There was mostly a left-of-center Western movement that said, we want organic foods and no vaccines. We want philosophical exemptions, not religious ones, philosophical exemptions. And it seemed as if organic, anti-genetic engineering, anti-vaccine thought was kind of a substitute for traditional religion among mostly agnostic and atheistic left-wing people. COVID has changed that. Now, at least in the United States, the overwhelming opposition to vaccines, look at Robert Kennedy Jr. and Donald Trump and their supporters. No vaccines. We don't want people to take flu vaccines. Let kids get measles. Let them die. And so I think we actually are in a completely different political situation. It is not a left or right situation. It is instead enlightenment against an anti-science movement that doesn't really care, actually moves to the edges of the political spectrum. And I'll just say it's enlightenment against darkness. One quick phrase in Spanish. Es una lucha de la iluminación contra las tenebras. It's enlightenment against anti-scientific darkness. I wonder if I could get your reaction to that.
Well, I could go on for a long time about Donald Trump. RFK Jr., I launched a campaign among the Nobel laureates to try to stop him from being nominated. I think all but one of the science and economic laureates in the US supported that. We sent a letter to every member of Congress to tell them that he should not be nominated. I went down to Washington to meet with Bill Cassidy, who wouldn't meet me, but I met his staff. And he said, or they said, that he was opposed to RFK Jr., but then he voted for him anyway. You have to realize that what's going on in the US at the moment is a great deal of bullying by someone who is really a mafia boss, i.e. Donald Trump, who threatens members of Congress if they don't vote the way that he wants them to vote. And I think this anti-science movement that's taking place in the US among the Republicans, mainly, not so much the Democrats, they're using it because they think they can get political power this way. It's all about politics, and it's crazy. In the past, there's been bipartisan support for science for as long as I can remember, but now it's going downhill, and it's spreading to other countries, and that's something that's very worrying. Just look at Argentina, for example, where you've got Milei, who doesn't want to fund any science in Argentina, so scientists are leaving. And that's going to happen in the US too. Already people are looking to leave. European Union is trying to attract them to come here. Britain is trying to attract them to go to Britain. We're going to lose a lot of the scientific talent that we have in the US, and it's mainly because of Trump and because of what's going on, what went on immediately when Musk was playing games. And it's bad. It's awful. Absolutely awful.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer to the question. We have no more time. You have one?
Well, there's a question over here.
One more.
Okay, just to an idea. According to salmon is like fish, is the translation for American people most of the time. The problem of salmon from an economic perspective is if it doesn't get the color, the consumer is afraid or opposed to the fish, which is super healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder why in US market they didn't have the idea, or perhaps I can suggest to you that you only change the stupid color and it saves like 60% of the produce cost, because the consumer don't accept the fish because of the color. It's a real problem. So they have to add chemicals in order to get the right color, which costs a lot for the producers. Thank you.
Right. So, and again, that is a problem that would be easy to fix. But the problem is regulation already has stopped GMO salmon from being available on the market. For 15 years, it was slowed down. It's only recently become available. You can imagine you make another trait, the regulators are going to take another 15 years to say, oh, it's okay. Who wants to wait that long? Who wants to pay for all of that? And the economics come into this in a big way when it takes so long. And the problem is not how long it takes us to do it. We could probably do it in less than a year, but regulators take forever to then say, oh, it's going to be okay. All right, so we have to change the regulations. We've got to change the way politicians think about this. They need to be educated. And they should all join this Italian senator who heard me talk I only talked for about 20 minutes, and she changed her mind. She said, no, I want to be pro-GMO. And this was 8 years ago now. So.
Thank you, Professor. I have no questions. I have everything clear. I'm trying to close my mouth. I would be listening to you 24 hours a day. I only want to tell you that I didn't see Spain in the positive in the slides with the positive slides, no? And I think I agree with you that civil citizens, civil society must play a role in this fact, in this issue, in this fight. So I want you to know that the ASEPELT, I would say 90% of the universities of this country, I call this idea, could help are at your disposal for next slides to be Spain into the slides. I can, if you think that we can help in collected funds from entrepreneurs, from universities, to organize a conference exclusively on this topic with great impact in media, etc., or in reaching the Pope, we are at your complete disposal. If you find interest in the idea, you can tell me what I should do, what we should do, and consider it done.
You have to speak to politicians.
Yeah, of course.
Don't
Politicians included. Yeah.
Don't talk to yourself. Talk to politicians.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
Yeah, but it's not easy. They often don't want to come to conferences. They don't want to spend time thinking about science. Most of them have absolutely no knowledge of science, and they don't care about it, right? They care about getting re-elected. That's the main thing.
We can try. The question is this is.
I always propose we should have term limits for politicians so that they don't have to worry about getting re-elected.